Welcome to episode 38 of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back with Tim. I think we missed you for an episode, Tim, right?
I did unfortunately miss one episode, and I've been regretting it ever since. I'm glad to be back. So let me tell everyone, all of our listeners, about our sponsor, Punch Out to Go. They are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punch Out to Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punch Out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents. So thank you to our sponsor. And Isaiah, I am very excited about our guest today, Paul Forno from Deloitte. Please continue.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've been mentioning Paul as someone we need to get on the podcast, and I mean, understanding his background now makes perfect sense. So, Paul, I think you've been in e-commerce pretty much, it sounds like, most or all of your career, but at some point, I'm assuming you kind of switched a little bit more into B2B e-commerce. So, tell us a little bit about the background and then what kind of got you into the B2B side of things.
Yeah. So Paul Forno, managing director, part of Deloitte Digital's commerce practice, head of Eminence and head of our B2B commerce practice. I've been doing commerce for the past 20 plus years in digital. I kind of rode the internet wave back, started doing internet projects back in 1996, right? Pretty much at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so
GeoCities and Yahoo stores.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did those. Yeah.
I remember when the first browser came out from Netscape and all through the standards fun. And so I've got that history. So I've worked through on the enterprise side, worked on the B2C with some pretty big mega brands in the past, like Target, Foot Locker, Eddie Bauer, limited brands, and I still do B2C, but I've been spending the last few years quite a bit more focused on B2B commerce. And Deloitte, we're the largest enterprise digital commerce service provider. We were just ranked number one by Forrester. The wave just came out last week.
I saw that. Yeah.
So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a lot of work.
Trellis on there. I was surprised. Trellis. No, I'm just kidding.
There's actually, I think there's a small to medium sized wave that they have come out. You'll have to look when it updates.
I gotta look into that. We're getting there. We're getting there, but we're not. I don't know. Even those guys might be. Some of those guys might be bigger than us. But yeah, I'm just kidding. So basically, you guys have seen a shift. Can you tell us about that shift? Like, what was it? Just like more demand from the market, where you're like, oh well, people are asking for this, and these are large B2B companies, so we gotta help them, and it's not just Target anymore. So, like, how did you?
Yeah, what we're seeing, just like the life cycle of what B2C went through, like dipping their toe in and going through the understanding. Like, it's kind of funny because I have lots of conversations on strategy. I also own our Eminence, so I'm out in the marketplace quite a bit. And so talking about B2C, I've gone from the stage of way back when I first started talking about e-commerce, it's like, trust me, it's going to be big. Retailers believe it. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll call it store number 1036, right? And literally treated it like a store. Like the revenue and the way it was separated, it was like treated completely in a silo as a store. And so we've gone through the whole life cycle on the B2C side, that now when I hear, if you're on Twitter all the time, you hear e-commerce everything. So me being the e-commerce guy, I'm like telling it, no guys, come on, relax. Retail is not dead. It's been around for thousands of years and it will continue. The mix will just change. So
more digitized. It's just more digital interactions
different models, etc. It's going to evolve. So I've gone through that whole life cycle on B2C, and if you think about B2B being laggards in many ways, and it's a lot to do with, kind of the background I would see is if you think about where the B2B business is from a commerce, you look at, traditionally there's how many B2B payments are out there. And one estimate in the US is that there's $17 trillion of B2B payments. And right now, half of them are still done manually.
Yeah. I think we had the CEO of Connexium on. I don't know if you saw on one of our podcasts, because they do a lot of that manual optimization. So they're kind of focused on that manual automation processing. But I think that's about exactly what he said.
Yeah. Ray Grady, super good guy. I've worked with him quite a bit.
Yeah.
Great tool, automation tool that he has focusing on manual invoices. But yeah, like the opportunity, if you look at the other half, the big chunk of that is EDI, and EDI is 40-year-old technology.
Yeah.
And
it kind of amazes me how much it's used.
Well, it was the first electronic way to buy, right? It was the cutting edge 30 to 40 years ago. And I think what you have is just some of the mega providers use that as such a default that you see those buys happening already. So I think, back to your core question of like, where is B2B? They're still early stage. And part of the challenge too is just looking at the problem area, right? You're trying to help what used to be deals that were done by middle-aged guys, sitting at the bar. Hey, I'm going to do this deal. Will you do this deal? Shake hands. And that's the deal. Well, so much has changed on where that's the de facto way to do business, right? And so that whole sales, CRM, buying, purchasing process, a couple of major changes have driven these changes. One, obviously the digital, right? And in many ways, lots of these companies are later to the game of technology. So that's number one. Number two, you just have a people change, right? So millennials now make up the largest portion of the workforce. So guess what? Their expectations of digital and the tooling is much different than what your classic baby boomer person working at a manufacturing company trying to do a B2B deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, we buy basically everything online at Trellis, and with the exception of sometimes you go to Costco to get like stuff.
There you go.
Literally like 99.9% of all of our, costs, like in our accounting and our QuickBooks, is digitized pretty much.
There you go.
Well, and also, I want to bring up one other thing too, is see where you want to weave this into the conversation. But COVID, so it's been 13 months, for most people in the U.S. and sometimes longer for folks in other parts of the world. How has that accelerated things in B2B, or how has it changed things? I mean, we've talked about that with a number of folks. What's your perspective on COVID and how that's played into things?
The interesting part of that, it's short term. It didn't. First of all, I think it's going to accelerate it overall. Mm-hmm. But in the short term, especially for manufacturing, the way they make decisions and buying, people were very conservative. And so in the first 6 months, actually, there was a pullback.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
On the B2B side, different from the B2C, right? The B2C obviously had to go, and I'm speaking more of like industrial.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. And some of their purchases, they probably pulled back in the first 6 months. And what I almost saw like January 1st, it was like an avalanche. Towards the end of the year into the beginning of this new year, it's just been like, oh my God, we're way behind. How do we accelerate everything? And it's gone much faster because they realize, oh crap, this is the new normal. And now we see that the economy is going to go. I can now put those investment dollars in. Whereas B2C, you didn't have any choice. You had to do it to stay alive. And so that
you had to do commerce.
Accelerated.
I mean, you had to do commerce. You don't just like, if anything, they already just kind of ramped up last year, just continued through this year. And our customers that did well with that, B2C, just continue to do well. But yeah, B2B is in this much more, I think, difficult position. So can you tell me what you think about that from like a cultural standpoint? Like, are they? I guess actually, let me take a step back there. I personally think that the new normal is going to be, even when we get back into person, there's still going to be so much, people are so used to being at home now that it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe I go to the office 2 days a week, but my expectations are now more digitized. So to your point, do you think that the B2B companies are starting to realize that and realize like, hey, we can't just like, assume we're going to go back to the bar, handshake deals, because that's probably not the way business.
Yeah. And I can provide a couple different perspectives because Deloitte we are the largest buyer of travel in the US.
So I believe that kind of makes sense, right? Because like
I had no idea. Large.
our consultants, right?
Yeah,
like traveling all the time.
Center's got to be number 2, probably, right?
Yeah. So it's a huge spend, and so we have a lot of people who do, forecasting that out and what the impact is going to be. And what they came back with right now is roughly we feel that our travel is going to be half of what it was, right? And so I normally travel like this is I haven't been on a plane in over a year. I normally travel 100,000 miles plus a year for the last 20 years, and so they see that as being at least half. So if you think about the side effect of all that, many companies are going to change how they do it. It's just going to be much more of a digital engagement. And so one important thing, like when we talk about B2B commerce, so many times there's some semantics here, right? Like even when I go talk to my clients that are B2B, the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm not sure if our guys are ready to make an order, right? Like, well, hold on here. Most of the benefit you get out of that buying process is actually many of the things that are friction points. Like, if you're ordering from a manufacturing, like one of the things from the voice of the customer. So one of the lessons learned here from B2C is listen to your customer. Mm-hmm. So in B2B, you have to listen to your customer. Who's your customer? Procurement people, shipping and receiving, right? So what's one of the things they ask for all the time? Where's my order? Just being able to have the status of your order and a customer portal to see where all your orders are. Oh my God, even if you can't order, that solves so much of their challenges, right? And being able to plan better, and then second, hey, I need product information. I do a lot of work in the chemicals industry. Well, guess what? There's very specific chemicals and legal things that they need to do and how to leverage those chemicals. So getting access to that is super important. So there's a lot of
real-time access. You want the Amazon, go search and find the product data. Like you don't want to have to call someone up, be like, can you tell me about your product?
Right. You need access to what, how do I implement this? How can I mix it? All of these things. And so the difference, and there's a lot of different segments within B2B, right? There's, very industrial chemical type companies that in fact have been laggards because a lot of the restrictions have just been around, hey, nobody wants to buy online and this, but they're really seeing that research come out. And in fact, new marketplaces are coming out around these industries that are, pushing all those, but individual companies just in the process of all the selling and all the digitization to do, to make work being easier with them. That's what B2B commerce is all about.
Well, one of you brought up a real favorite of mine in recent conversations. So, it's just the access to that information, right? I mean, this is one of the key things here that we're saying is so critical. And although I can't name them, there's a mining company that I had discussions with pretty recently. And it's fascinating just getting into those conversations because what do I know about mining, right? I really am not, that's not what I think about most of the time. However, once they started putting out certain types of information simply about just what they do, all sorts of people start contacting them they never expected. So, for example, they realized some of the minerals that they put out into the world for particular uses now have applications in the pet food industry. They had no idea. So it's like this whole other thing that's opened up to this, mature, well off kind of company that's been around forever. And now it's like, oh, now we're putting out this information and we have access to a whole new market. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So,
yeah, I think that the amount of potential is so high. It's really underestimated, I think, from these companies. But let's say that they get to sort of agree, like, okay, we need to do this. I'm assuming you're seeing more of that with COVID. Like, all right, we probably need to do some sort of B2B commerce thing. What's happening after that? Like, are you seeing the buy-in from the CEOs and the executives and the maybe a layer below that, and then do the problems start? Like, is that where? Because I mean, I think that's just because you want to do it doesn't mean it's going to be successful.
So that's a good point. What you just touching on. There's another big thing, and we spend a lot of time on this, is the change management about it. And you have a whole sales organization, right? And I'll use an example. One time, a couple of years ago, we got called in, and this company implemented this. They said it was awesome B2B commerce website, and they weren't getting the engagement. They weren't getting the orders, and they couldn't figure out why. And so we went and talked to the customers, and we saw a pattern there. Almost across the board, the people said, hey, I really like my sales guy, but my sales guy tells me that if I put the orders in via the e-commerce site, I'm not going to get my bonus. And you're like, oh, of course, if you don't align the salesmen or bring the salespeople along for the process, you're not going to drive that.
I think that's a simple solution. I always tell our customers, and they don't ask me as much as they should about this. I think one of the problems of B2B commerce is they're so used to having their ERP consultants and these other kind of consultants tell them what to do. They really need to start listening to the Trellises, the Deloitte Digital commerce people like you, and you're their consultant of how to make this work, because it's really a simple solution. You could tag a sales rep. You could probably find a simple way to tag every customer to a sales rep, or assign every order to a sales rep in a fairly programmatic. I don't want to simplify it too much, but there's definitely a solution there that's somewhat programmatic, where salesperson goes say, hey, look, my customers did $1 million on the website. Great, give me my bonus.
Actually, the funny that you say that. That's actually what we've done with salespeople to get them engaged. We've done gamification. So not only do we get into some of the planning of how best to, like, if you want to hear the voice of the customer, your best sales guys are the guys that know and listen to the customer. And so in many ways, what we want to put on a B2B customer, it's an engagement similar to your best salesperson. And so we listen to them early, but then we use games, because just like anything, until you get them over the hump and they trust that A, they're going to get paid, and that two, and this is the best thing we hear from sales guys, is like, hey, I don't no longer have to like worry about where's my order, right? Instead of that, they know to go to the website. And instead of dealing with all the administrative trivia, they're focused on building relationships or selling bigger deals.
I mean, I've been saying this for a few years now, maybe even longer, is like, I personally believe if you're not a consultant or have consultative capabilities, you're essentially useless as a salesperson. Like, you're just an order taker.
Yeah.
Or you will be replaced by a computer or a digital experience. That's my personal opinion, whether you agree or not. But and to that point, it's like, if you're spending half your time following up on orders or just doing admin stuff, it's like, that's not competitive. I think that's the key point that I think people need to realize, is that that's not a competitive use of a salesperson's time. Salespeople should be expensive. They should be probably your highest paid people, or some of your highest paid people. And if they're like, hey, yeah, your order is going to be there tomorrow, like, do you really want to pay someone $100 an hour to do that? Or, whatever the salesperson's salary commission rate is, they should be selling.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's awesome that you guys have done that. That's
Yeah, I support that completely too. I mean, and you know, the funny thing, of course, is that it really is true B2B, B2C, digital and non-digital, that, you know, salespeople really need to not be doing things outside of sales. I mean, you know, that people used to talk about that when I was a retail guy decades ago. You know, it's like, oh my God, they're bogged down in the paperwork. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, they're bogged down in the paperwork, and that's just absolutely not good for the business, because they should be out on the floor or whatever the.
And then you had sales admin people back in the day that would like do all the paperwork and stuff, you know. So now that's all digitized. But yeah, I mean, you guys have so much experience with solving these problems at like a large, like the largest scale of any digital agency. So tell us about, like, there's the salesperson problem. We've talked a lot about that in the podcast. And I think that the solution isn't that complicated, right? You just basically told us.
Mm-hmm.
You get them involved and you gamify, make sure they're incentivized. And it's just any order that goes to the website with them is just like as if they called them. You know what I mean? It's like their deal, right? So let's say you solve that problem. What are the other big problems? You know, I know there's a lot of problems, but maybe if you could, what are the top 3 other problems besides the salespeople alignment that you're seeing on average? I know it's tough. It depends on the customer.
Well, again, very similar to what B2C when they initially got it. Like, okay, great. I just need to install something and then I'm done. Like if you've seen those old infomercials, set it and forget it, right?
Doesn't work. It doesn't
work, right? So
it's not like a mop. It's not a Roomba.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you leverage the data that comes out? And how do you actually help the sales process? So for example, Tim, you mentioned about that insight that people started seeing, oh, who's on my website looking at these information? Well, a good best practice that we do is like, hey, your salespeople is not just to take off time. They can look at their own dashboards. Hey, who's looking at your customers? What are they looking at? Did you notice that this customer has been on this product page 20 times in the past 2 weeks? That's a pretty good signal, right? So you might want to.
Why didn't they buy it, right? Like if they.
Yeah, like, hey, they might be really thinking about that. So as you're going up the curve is like, how do you use the data to then influence how for them to spend the time, right? And so working that data, the dashboards, next best action, like, oh, hey, you should send an email. Hey, that there may be an email that prompts them to come up. And then that might prompt you to get involved in automating all those processes.
Mm-hmm.
So what about pricing and inventory and logistics and the ERP systems? Are you guys seeing that? You know, I think the smaller scale that we're at, we see that as a big problem because just the budgets that these guys have to work with, they don't realize that it barely covers design, development, integrating into their ERP and all the complexity of kind of like merging these two systems. Like, is that still, are you guys able to overcome that just because these companies are larger and have more money to invest in that? Or is that still a major problem at these larger size companies?
Right. Yeah, I think the big wave that you're seeing right now is many of the big clients that are using our ERP are going through an upgrade wave. So SAP going to S4 and HANA.
Is that like a cloud version? Is it the newer cloud version? Or?
The new cloud version and just the new version, right?
Yeah.
And getting that out. And so, you know, that's almost our fastest growing, capability right now. It's unbelievable how fast that's growing. And so what ends up happening is, and I'll oversimplify this because this is literally what I'm spending most of my time in the last couple months is, you know, finance and operations get the new best in breed ERP, which helps them, the core operations. But then the business and the marketing, like, hey, I need a new front office engagement. And sometimes it's not the same platform, right? Like, and so
a lot of these ERP systems aren't really well designed for e-commerce or.
They're not. No, it's more back office, like S4. They bought, you know, for example, SAP bought Hybris.
Yeah.
It's now SAP Commerce, and they bought a bunch of other stuff that makes up SAP CX. And it's those are great tools, and there's other great tools on the front end, Salesforce on the front end, and Adobe. Yeah. So we're involved in many ways of the front office. When you're talking B2B, we kind of talk about front office, mid office, and back office. Mm-hmm. So SAP, these massive upgrades that are driving a lot of these changes to upgrade their front office is really driven by the S4 upgrades.
Okay. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like how do you, what do you recommend for these customers from the back office, mid office? Like how do you navigate that with them?
So all of them, and it's hard to, you know, summarize because it's across every different industry.
Let's just use the example of like the SAP guy upgrading to S4.
Yeah. So in many ways, a lot of these companies might have implemented SAP for the first time, maybe like 20 years ago, and have gone through minor upgrades, etc. So S4 being a major upgrade, they use that as an opportunity to relook at their operations. So you'll get into business process optimization, maybe changing the way they do some stuff to optimize. And so it'll be a big investment, but then they're planning for the next 20 years for their core operations to run on this digital. So that's what's really driving it. And it's looking at, again, automating as much as possible and also providing the back office real-time data. That's the real big push. Like if you've heard of HANA, it's a real-time data engine so that you're getting as much of the operational data as quickly as possible so that you can make decisions quicker because everything's going faster and faster.
I agree. I mean, that's one of the things that we've done with the ERP in the mid-market is we built some integration so that it just pulls in the real-time pricing from the ERP into the front end, in a lot of the cases is Magento, because we do a lot of Magento B2B work. But because otherwise integrating the pricing and mapping it over and like syncing it would be just such a nightmare. The pricing's so complex. They have different pricing for different customers, and it's better to just display it in real time than it is to like sync it, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, obviously you guys have experience with the big players, Hybris, Salesforce, Adobe, Magento. Adobe's Magento, I think still getting used to that. But can you just give people like a brief, you know, overview of what you're seeing in the market there? I mean, I think it's just valuable for people because that's another thing. People struggle with that. I think they choose the wrong platform all the time. I mean, we see that all the time. We're like, oh man, you're on the wrong platform. I'm not sure we can help you.
I'm going to start it with a not a buzzword, right? Headless is not the answer to everything, right?
No.
Headless is so overhyped right now.
Yeah. I think it can be a good solution, but it has to be the right kind of. We're actually seeing it more in the sophisticated B2C. We haven't done it for a B2B company yet. Just the more sophisticated, complicated B2C builds we've done it.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm seeing more in the B2B space is more, again, you'll get a stack. Like people are picking strategic platforms that are integrated for the long term, you know, be it the Salesforce, SAP, or Adobe, and to some extent, lesser extent, Oracle on the enterprise side. So, you know, that's primarily the major decisions are picking, hey, what bet am I going to make as far as the major stack?
It's a long-term decision, right? You're talking like what do you think, a five plus year decision at least?
Yeah, five. It's a good 5-year decision. I think anything beyond that on the front office is too much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen the life cycle of the e-commerce platforms the last 20 years, and it's about a 3 to 5 year, right? Like just as we're talking about headless, like back 5-6 years ago, it was about Spring Framework on Java, you know, that accelerated tools. And before that, it was like, the mega platforms that were just commerce. So, right now, the major platforms and how they integrate with the CRM, right? It's so important to understand for B2B that whole sales lifecycle is important. It's not the same decisioning point as the B2C. And I think, again, you're going to see more microservices and capabilities plugged in here or there. and some players coming up. But on a B2B, the way all these need to integrate so much more and into CRM, platforms and those integrations are almost more important.
I agree. So it sounds similar to what we're seeing. It seems like Salesforce and Adobe Magento are kind of the two main bigger players in the B2B space that are taking up a lot of the new market share or winning newer deals.
Oh, and SAP. Actually, SAP probably has the bit on the enterprise side that we see. SAP probably has the highest market share for commerce.
They're getting a lot of new deals though. Is that legacy or is that new? That's kind of what.
That's new. No. Yeah,
they're still winning new deals. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So SAP is still winning some of the new larger deals, and like you said, Oracle to a lesser extent. What about some of these other, newer players or smaller players? I know maybe they're too small for you guys, but ones that we're seeing, and we really like BigCommerce just because BigCommerce is. We like that they're kind of in between. Like we describe it as kind of in between Magento and Shopify, and we feel like that's actually
they're transitional. When people are at this part of their growth curve, I think BigCommerce is perfect.
No, it's a great tool. I know Brent, the CEO, well, and it's a great tool. Mid-market.
The other one that's interesting that we're seeing is Insight. It just got bought by Episerver. Do you guys ever see them, or have they ever really popped up, or not? Not really.
They were coming up a couple of years ago, and from I see it more as a very niche player, especially for people that are big in the Microsoft world and want to stick to the Microsoft technology world. Like they're at least
ASP.NET. Yeah, it's an ASP.NET framework. Yeah. And then the other one that's got a lot of traction that from a Gartner hype perspective, but frankly, I'll be honest, I'm not sold, so I might get in trouble with that. But is Commerce Tools. What have you guys seen from them? And we've done a little investigation, but we haven't actually built the site, but we've kind of like played around with it.
Yeah, no, they've actually probably fastest growing, and ironically, they're the biggest believers in headless. And Kelly Ghosh, if you ever have him on, you should have him on. He'll debate you forever on. He's a purist on.
We'll have to bring on Kelly Ghosh.
He's their chief product officer, but we're seeing them pop up. Especially, they've done a lot of big deals in Europe. And they've been like injecting, they're really good for, hey, we're really big. We need to add in a new function and feature into a large corporation, but they don't want to change the whole platform right away, that you can incrementally add a unit, pieces like that. And so I think over the long term, I think they'll continue to do better. Like out of all of the quote unquote headless type platforms that are out there, in the enterprise space, they're probably the furthest ahead.
But the problem that I see in that space is like, why wouldn't you just use, your own custom React or whatever? You build your own kind of front end, or there's all these new front end tools that you can use to build that faster, and then just tie into a Magento or SAP. Or is it because you think the APIs and they're working on that though? That's the thing. Magento's working on that, and BigCommerce is working on that. So I guess my point is like, why wouldn't all these other platforms just essentially become the same thing in terms of just
I think the
APIs?
No, the difference, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate comparing it. The benefits that like Commerce Tools have is their APIs and the engines underneath are all cloud native from the ground up, right? And so the way they've optimized, it's not, you can have APIs wrapped around older code, right? Where that's the case. Like if you look at Magento, which is great, they have a GraphQL interface around a lot of older code, right? But what Commerce Tool has is like cloud native capabilities that power the microservices. So they're much more efficient and scale at a larger.
Yeah, so they have kind of an advantage from that perspective, from an architecture standpoint. But I think it'll be interesting to see, because I think a lot of these other companies are gonna, the ones that they're traditionally not headless, they are reacting to it. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they.
And again, and this is my point to a lot of these conversations, because I'm on Clubhouse quite a bit, and I've had the CEO. I've had Kelly, I had Commerce Tools, Bold Commerce, Fabric, another.
Is that a new one? There's a new headless one?
Fabric, yeah.
That's a new headless one, but again, also pretty interesting. And they're, the new buzzword that's better is like talk about composable commerce, right?
I don't like that buzzword.
I think it's better than the headless. But we got into a lot of the discussion. I think if you take away the religious discussions around it and think about, like, for different companies, having these platforms is great, and all the other things that are already tied around, where if you have a very technical workforce already working at your company and you want to build your own things, that's where it's better for a commerce tool. Whereas, if, as we look at some of the Salesforce things, well, that's probably better for a company that already has a lot of workforce around the Salesforce tool set, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
So I had a couple questions that kind of come from a different angle, because they come up from a lot of the folks that I've spoken with. They're really from the customer angle in B2B. So what are you hearing about, like, voice activated? What are you hearing about just more mobile capabilities for customers in B2B, right? I mean, so the customers can do basically anything and everything on their iPhone, potentially. And things like even just imagery. I've talked a lot about people, where formerly it's the thing that we've talked about before, where it's like, single static images of components or whatever that were no good. But, really the increase of video and all of this other stuff. So from that angle, what are you hearing, like what the customer is demanding, and where B2B e-commerce is and meeting that demand? Yeah,
sure. And so remember, B2B is such a wide swath, right? And so obviously, if you get into, hey, I'm Bose and I'm selling headphones, and you're a B2B and you need to provide lots of cool content in that's one stuff. But I think that's covered enough on a lot of different areas. I'm going to focus on more the industrial guys, right? Like the oil and gas, the manufacturers. So it's good to get an understanding, and this just helps. Like, I just had this as is review with a client like 2 weeks ago. Right now, their customers are frustrated because they still have to have the old IE version on Windows. I think they still have to use Windows NT so that they can order, because it only works on an ActiveX in an old IE to be able to order. And then they're wondering why their commerce has gone down, right? So they're so far behind, right? Like, they're not even to the point of like, can I just get it on a browser? Can I get a web version to put on my phone, right? Like, they're on aggregate, they're so infantile compared to most, right? Now, that's an oversimplification. Many of the leading corporate companies they're very fast rolling these pieces out, but it's much more on early
laptops or
it's much more on the early stages for these B2B guys.
So what would you recommend for someone like in an oil and gas, or just some sort of more industrial, complicated kind of product that's not so sexy consumer facing? What would you recommend for them to manage? How should they go about managing their product data with e-commerce? Like, should they put a ton of effort into images? Should they put a ton of effort into images and schematics and things like that? Or do you think it's more like, hey, just make it a really good experience to order the product?
Yeah, I guess it depends on and it gets interesting. And again, I didn't come from this, so I'm learning a lot of this too, right? So, I deal with and I won't name the names, but some of these chemical companies, they do additives. So, if you get any kind of plastic cup, like I've got a plastic cup here in this green, well, you need certain types of chemicals and color additives to make all of this. And so, what they have is like, okay, what are all the ingredients, right? And it's more of like, if you think about chemicals, it's almost like a recipe that you would make for cooking at home is almost the same analogy for chemicals. And so, yeah, so you have all of these, what are the things that you can bring together and that can make something that they want to build? And so they're trying to empower those conversations. And so it's not like, hey, I need to look at different stuff on the chemical side. They're looking at ingredients and we've done a lot of parts stores. Like on parts stores, that's where you get into schematics and like just what's important in data there is like, hey, I need very specific SKUs or SKUs that are applicable to my company or my ordering numbers that connect to those. So those are product information things that are key. So again, slightly different things, but product info and again, thinking about each business is slightly different. It's not about just buying stuff. It may be processed, especially like oil companies. Hey, I'm going to take an order on a tanker, right? in 6 months. And so you're projecting out and you're planning. And so it's not like just buying a SKU and I'm done. It's almost like, how do you model the buying process for them?
Yeah.
Well, and what do you think though, if it's a lot of process related stuff, for example, of like live chat in B2B, right? I mean, because or just like the consultative appointment based kind of stuff in a B2B environment. I mean, how does that play in for a lot of these folks? Because to me, it seems like a no-brainer for a lot of these, companies, but they're not quite there yet.
Yeah, some of the challenges just you get what's being sold to them, right? Like you might have CRM is going to solve everything, or since B2B commerce is fairly new, then you get in depending on who sold them on what. Like, if I came in as a CPQ, vendor, all of a sudden everything's CPQ, and so you have a little bit of confusion in the front office. And so one of the things I'm actually doing, even in my own firm, is like I'm talking about, instead of just saying B2B commerce, I'm talking about B2B solutions. Meaning I'm thinking about that whole front office of how do I help to sell, to transact, and then we'll figure out what the components are for different companies, because so much so is that particular problem, like depending on which widget they came to help solve a problem, they might solve a little piece, but then miss the forest from the trees.
Would you agree that B2B companies in general, small or big, with this kind of stuff, they should invest more time in a Deloitte Digital or a Trellis or whoever it is as a consultant, a commerce consultant, to help them like think through what they're actually trying to accomplish up front? Like maybe spend even 1, 2, 3 months, like, okay, how do you want people to buy from you? Like, do they come to the website, then they call the sales rep? Like, it seems like they need to think more about their processes instead of just kind of like, hey, I need to build a portal where people go on and buy,
Yeah, we definitely, and again, size the companies, and it might not even not be that long. And in fact, we do a lot of very quick, agile work, because a lot of times they've never even paused for any time to really think about it, right? And so just the fact of spending a week or two of breaking it down and helping them think through those processes and who should be involved, and then facilitating that conversation about what's next and what the tools are. In some ways, they're benefiting from, they're just catching up to this, but hey, people already done a bunch of B2B solutions. So like stuff that's out of the box is like, start there. So I say, push stuff that's out of the box, learn along that, get in the marketplace, get something out. So for example, we've even taken like huge corporations like, GE and Siemens live in 12 weeks from beginning
out of the box
to get an MVP out.
Yeah. I think that's smart. I think that's where a lot of the B2B companies are failing, because they're so, they're trying to do everything, or like they're like trying to fit. What we're seeing is they're trying to fit a lot of their ERP process and merge that into e-commerce. And that's hard because some of these e-commerce platforms are not designed for that. And those projects drag out because they're trying to create so much process
Yeah.
Into
Yeah.
e-commerce that it wasn't designed for. Instead of kind of going the other way and saying, okay, let's go with the MVP of what, Magento Enterprise, the B2B module offers, or BigCommerce, they have a bundle B2B app. So it does kind of actually a lot. You could take one of these tools pretty quickly, get it out there, and then like, okay, maybe that sort of works for some customers. And then you kind of like iteratively work backwards, like, okay, some customers need this integration and some customers need this thing. And then you kind of like slowly prioritize what actually people need. Because I think also sometimes they make assumptions that turn out to be false.
Yeah. In fact, the first MVPs, most of my MVPs lately I've been doing, you don't even order.
Yeah.
You give them a customer portal. And I'm telling you, people, that's a huge win, right? Because what you want to do is you want that buy-in. Get them a quick win. They believe on you, and then take the next steps. And so that's part of the process. Get something in quick, get them to believe, and then build from there.
I mean, I like that idea of like MVP is your product data so they can search and find product data and see order status and look at orders. And then the salespeople love it because they're like, hey, I don't have to tell people all the product data and, or the order status. And then you kind of layer in e-commerce and, you know, I think that's a very viable way for companies to move forward without this monstrosity of these multi-year projects or,
right.
Which happens, I think, all too often in B2B. I'm sure you guys have seen that happen where they come to you with like some massive RFP and you're like, we can do it, but it's going to cost you like a bajillion.
And we break it down. Yeah. And we end up breaking it down.
Yeah.
So we've often, talked on this podcast and in this one too, about like the 3 to 5 year life, of a solution, let's just say, or, of a platform or whatever people are up to. So, I tend to like asking people, 3 to 5 years from now, what do you think folks are going to be thinking about in B2B commerce, or what are going to be the hot topics, or, just what do you see happening in 3 to 5 years from now in B2B commerce versus today?
Yeah, I think, again, there'll still be catching up, right? Like, there's $6 trillion worth of revenue that we still need to automate. So they'll still be on this, the companies that are holding out to get there. So that's number one. Number two, I think what you'll see is much more of data and automation pieces that will help queue sales channel. So one, predictive. So one of the things that we're really cool thing that we're doing is we did this joint investment with like 20 different companies called the Smart Factory. So we actually built a plant at Wichita State, which is right next door to the second largest airplane builder in the U.S. is in Wichita, Airbus. And so we jointly built out like this IoT, all these tools already all automated in there to show a demo. So a lot of what you're going to see for some portions of B2B is you're not going to order, the machines are going to order, right? And a lot of that, like they're going to tell you, they're going to communicate back and forth when parts are ready to go. They're going to you're going to see a message back, hey, it's time to reorder, right? Mm-hmm. And so the machines and the IoT sensors are going to be much more and more engaged and just starting down the process. So you're going to be like getting over getting everybody on electronically and selling, but then more and more the automation right from the manufacturing floor.
Wow. So what do you, to add to that? I mean, I haven't even heard that one before, which is, it's always good to hear something new on the podcast, but what do you think the sense of urgency should be here? Because as we saw with B2C, and I've been kind of alluding to this, and we saw the retail apocalypse, right? Where the Toys R Us and where's Borders, they're like, who cares about e-commerce? People just come to our store. They, because I think they didn't realize that it's not just e-commerce, it's how much that drives in store, because you're looking at the website and then you go to the store. Like it was just, they really underestimated this wave of business through digital. Do you see that happening in the next 3 to 5, 10 years in B2B? Like, because I kind of see where, like, to your point, it's like, I feel like we're in 2010 in B2B as where B2C was, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or 2010, 2000, like when Magento first came out and people started using Magento and B2C, it's like kind of where we are with B2B, right? So it's like 5-10 years behind. So do you see that same kind of like the ones that get ahead are going to be the Wayfarers and the Amazons and just really dominate, and the ones that fall behind just kind of die out? Like, do you see that happening here?
Yeah, there's a lot of new vendors coming in. And so again, it's B2B so mega big, like you're getting oil and gas, manufacturing, life sciences, and so it's so massive so it's hard to have broad things, but by different segment, I will say one thing on B2C, and I like to, when we talk about the retail apocalypse, and I think I'm even chatting about this later today, but we talked about that a little bit, and the retail apocalypse, it was kind of a misnomer, because really what happened was a lot of things happened because of what happened from a people perspective, right? And we did a bunch of studies, and we talked about this for a few years, is if you look at, a real earned income in the last 10 years, the bottom 20% of people actually have gone down in real earnings. The top 20% has gone way up, and the middle has stayed about the same. Well, if you look at the retailers who have like exploded, right? It's Dollar General, low cost. Those stores, they're growing like crazy, right? Dollar stores, Walmart's at the lower end, they're doing really well. And, high-end stores, Apple, right? All of these, direct-to-consumer brands that are high-end, that are at the luxury, are doing super well. Yeah. The people in the middle, if you're stuck in the middle, those are the guys who have disappeared, right? Or going away. The Sears of the world, Kmart's, those guys that are stuck, that don't have anything unique, that are too high, or not enough luxury. So that's what's really happened, is
so it was less of
those two.
Yeah, it was almost more of a market shift, a total market shift, than just but I think there's some components of digital there where it's appealing to.
Oh yeah, that accelerated. Yeah.
Yeah. The higher end, you kind of have to appeal from a digital. I think that higher end of the market is definitely more of a digital first interaction.
Yeah, and a good factoid, going back to 2010, JCPenney was in the top 5 of the overall internet retailers.
Yeah.
For e-commerce.
Yeah.
And they were doing fairly well on e-commerce. And a CEO came in from Target and completely de-emphasized digital. He wanted to make JCPenney different. He de-emphasized digital, and we all saw what happened.
Well, what's interesting to me too, and I've done, like, I call them like digital marketing crash courses and stuff. And I run through the history and, just quizzing people, like, which was the biggest company before the internet, for retail. And, then you talk about A&P, and you talk about Woolworth, and you talk about, and this is like in a lot of people's lifetimes in the last 40, 50 years, where these were still like huge forces. And then you see the shifts, right? I mean, it's just, it's extraordinary. So the market shifts that you're talking about here have really been, extraordinary, because we've lived them, but it's also because, they have happened before. I mean, I guess.
Sears was the Amazon of its time. If you look at the history of Sears, it's unbelievable.
They shut down their catalog operations, in 94? Right, just like 2 or 3 years before the internet became a big thing. It's like, oh my God, come on, guys.
Hey, that's I have another great story on that one. That's like Peapod, one of the original e-commerce delivery food player, closed down in February of 2020.
I know. Can you believe that? And that was part of Stop and Shop and Ahold or whatever. And then they ended up going to Instacart.
Exactly. It's the craziest thing.
Did they migrate all to Instacart? Is that what they did, or what did they?
Yeah,
Stop and Shop, which owned Peapod, ended up being kind of at a loss, because they had basically shut down Peapod just before COVID. So they were like, well, what do we do? And they ended up getting a partnership, among others, with Instacart. So they blew it. Unfortunately. Really unfortunate.
Oh man. Well,
But on
basically,
that
the
note,
moral of the story is that, keep investing in digital, it sounds like.
Oh yeah.
exactly. Well, any final comments before we wrap up? Believe it or not, we have gone through our time on this wonderful podcast. We're going to need you back, by the way.
For sure.
Back.
Yeah. No, I think B2B commerce, if anybody can remember anything, when you talk about B2B commerce, it's just about making it easier to do business with between companies. It's not just about the order.
I agree. I think it sounds so simple, but I think that gets lost in what does the homepage look like? All of a sudden they get caught up in this design project that doesn't necessarily make it easier for the customer to buy from you.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But Paul de Forno from Deloitte Digital, right? Is that exactly what I want to make sure I got the division right? It's great having you here as our guest.
Yeah, this is awesome. I think it's really, really different kind of perspective than we've had before. So we'll definitely have to have you back on. I'm sure in 6 to 12 months, you'll have some new story or challenge.
All right. No, I'd love it. Yeah. And in the meantime, I tweet a lot about commerce and share kind of the latest and greatest. So follow me on DeForno P on Twitter.
I want to follow. I don't know if I follow you, so let me do that right now.
We need your pearls of wisdom. And all our listeners, thank you for another episode of the Hard Truth About B2B eCommerce.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.